If we compare that part of iGaming industry with forex, the live streaming of an online casino is exactly the same with the liquidity and the liquidity breach in a forex broker's scenario. None of them can afford any lag, any latency. The only difference is that in forex we talk about data streaming, data feed, and in the gambling industry we are talking about video, like media streaming, which of course we're not talking about kilobytes or bytes, but gigabytes or terabytes.
Here we are. Here's another podcast session, Financial Frontiers. Today, my guest is Stefano Sordini from NetShop. We work obviously close together. Have I pronounced the surname correctly? Sordini.
Sordini.
Sordini,
Yes,
Italian. Sordini.
Yeah, Sordini.
Good. Stefano, let's introduce yourself. Tell us about your background. Let's talk about what NetShop does and how that ties in, and give some insight to the end trader.
Yes. Hi Dinos, first of all, thanks for inviting me, and I wish you all the best in this new business journey, let's say, in this adventure. I'm Stefano Sordini. I'm the CEO and founder of NetShop ISP. We are purely a hosting provider based in Cyprus with data centers worldwide. My background is purely tech. I used to be 100% hands-on, but as the years were passing, I tried to put myself, let's say, 10-15% outside the hands-on zone, so I could manage all the aspects of the business. I started NetShop back in 2004 as we started from web development, so web design was my passion. Back from when I was 12 years old, it was the first book I bought from London. I started creating some website for friends, family, and then as the projects were coming, I had to get hosting for the websites we were building. So it was then that hosting started giving me that rush. The fact that a remote piece of equipment running 24/7 was accommodating a website, and back then the enthusiasm came when real businesses started relying on that server. So if that server had a glitch, the boss of the company was calling me, what's going on? So yes, this is when NetShop was started. We started out of IRC. We had a small channel selling bots when people wanted to keep their nickname on IRC 24/7.
Are you talking about what I remember is Mirc, M-I-R-C, the chat?
Yes,
the chat.
MIRC, yes.
Oh man,
yes.
that was ages ago.
Yes, ages ago. So we used to sell a small, it's basically a shell account running on a Linux server. And the most expensive one was £1 a month. The most expensive one back in 2006. And nowadays, thankfully, we kept the part of the business which is related to development. We don't do external development projects, but if today I try to go back, it's a very good thing that we kept, because now with the whole DevOps approach, development in hosting is like they go one-to-one. It helps us with automations. It helps us with troubleshooting and helping clients. It helps us improve the services we offer to the clients through our platform, and several other things. So as of today, it stands that hosting business backed by our engineers and then development team.
That's interesting, yes. And, when you mentioned DevOps, that's definitely a skill that's come in need, from these different technologies that merge. And, I think when we talk about DevOps, those are the exact engineers that are required to maintain a cloud, right? A cloud environment.
Yes.
So, we may be speaking here in a tongue that many might not understand. So, but before we get into those details, what is DevOps? What does it even mean? What's cloud? Server versus cloud. A physical server versus cloud. People, when you mention cloud, they think of clouds in the sky. I mean, what does that even mean, right? And then, but before we get there, the NetShop, let's talk about the specific sectors. Who are the our brokers? I know for sure, but who's the main focus? Because you did also mention, different data centers that you have, Malta, whatever it is. Let's talk about the focus. The industry that you focused on. Why it's important to have data centers, let's talk about that later. But for now, which is the industry?
So basically, we can accommodate anyone and everyone. And that's the challenging part of our business, that although we are serving all the industries, we have to focus in some industries so that we do the appropriate training. We get people who are more related into those industries to further support our clients. So these industries are streaming, e-commerce, fintech, and gambling, iGaming. But during the day, we may have orders coming from a guy who is doing email marketing and needs servers to distribute emails. We may have a guy who is a web developer. So regardless how much we are into iGaming and fintech and forex, we need to accommodate everyone. So this is where the DevOps and automation part comes. In order to be able to focus and spend hours in industries which are very, very demanding, like forex, we had to automate a big portion of our operations so that a small client who comes for a cheap service like web hosting or a small VPS, we spend 5 seconds on it, or even 0 seconds. We don't have the luxury of spending 15 minutes for an order of a cheap cloud server. So we had to automate big part of the operations so that we can focus on supporting fintech and iGaming customers.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you mentioned VPS, that stands for Virtual Private Server.
Yeah.
And for those who don't know how that is important, comes into there's a few, I guess, benefits. One of the main ones that are the most obvious is the latency.
Yeah.
And then obviously the others, with 24/7, that it's always running and whatever it is. And while as a business decision, NetShop focuses on the businesses, because there's whatever education, spending time with the client. It wouldn't be viable to the business to spend that amount of time for an order that's $20 a month, where your profit is, versus however, automation is important, and every single person is important.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. And that's not to say that you don't have services available for the small guy. Just the difference is, like Google, for example, cannot speak to every single person on the planet.
Exactly.
But what's available, it's all kind of, they've got their procedures and whatever.
Yes.
You can find your answers online.
That's correct. But what I'm saying is that I'm sure in my previous life, I'm sure that I was in the hospitality industry for sure. I mean, sometimes I would spend on the phone or on Skype or on live chat 1 hour with a guy who has problem with €5 cPanel hosting. And the lesson from that is that I will spend that time, but what do we do for the second customer with the same issue? So this helps us. We do the appropriate documentation. We do video manuals, user manuals. We fine-tune our portal so that every single person can find whatever he or she wants without the need of speaking to a person. If they do need to speak to a person, we are always available. But that's the challenging part, that every day is an optimization day.
Okay. Before we get into the specifics of these different services, and mostly those that relate to the fintech industry, streaming. Just let's speak a little bit about what streaming is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. If I've understood it correctly, streaming is live video content that streams through multiple clients that connect and get this, let's call it streaming services. Now, and that could come in and if I had to guess, I think that streaming and iGaming go hand in hand. Or
yes,
because sorry to interrupt there. I've had an involvement in the iGaming industry quite a while ago, and what we were working on was a roulette-based product that had a live dealing, that had a live stream video coming from the casino, and gamblers from home were able to place their roulette bets in this digital, environment on a physical table that they could see in the video.
And you cannot afford any latency on that.
Yes.
So if we compare that part of iGaming industry with forex, the live streaming of an online casino is exactly the same with the liquidity and the liquidity breach in a forex broker's scenario. None of them can afford any lag, any latency. The only difference is that in forex we talk about data streaming, data feed, and in the gambling industry we are talking about video, like media streaming, which of course we're not talking about kilobytes or bytes, but gigabytes or terabytes. So yes, streaming is very challenging. Streaming is one of the reasons that we expanded 2 years ago in locations with super high network speed, and that is Amsterdam. So we used to do streaming hosting in Cyprus, but that's for a different streaming business site. Cyprus is an ideal location for specific satellites. So people from around the world who they are, for example, service provider for hotels, they need Cyprus to download channels from specific satellites and broadcast them to regional hotels. That's one part of streaming, and Cyprus is fine. But for the media streaming with large content that need to be delivered within 2 seconds, that's why Amsterdam came to the picture.
Wow. So, where latency is important, I think what would be quite insightful here is to give a practical example. And I can understand how the latency is extremely important and vulnerable to the casino.
Yeah.
Because imagine someone's at the casino table, they've got their Bluetooth in their head, and then they're looking at the table, and the guy sitting at home is looking at a delayed video.
Correct.
Right? But is able to place trades on a result that has already been seen by the person that's actually there.
Yeah.
Now, the phone we know is real time. When I speak on the phone, and wherever you are in the world, you're going to hear it pretty much instantaneously. It's so much more challenging to get a video streamed at the same time,
that's correct. And I could give the same comparison in forex. where you cannot afford, if you have a trader from Malaysia and a trader from Cyprus trading on a trading server that sits in London, you cannot have the Malaysian traders seeing some delay, because then that people could take advantage. So it's the same the same need, the same challenge in terms of the infrastructure, different industries though.
It should be so much more easier for you as a challenge compared to in the fintech industry compared to the the gaming industry, because as you mentioned, to transfer terabytes and gigabytes worth of data in forex or in the fintech industry, it's text.
Yes,
that can be instant. So, and the best way to compare that for the the average user is, think about how long it takes you to download a video versus how long it takes you to download a Word file.
Yes,
it's people have actual real life examples of that.
That is why when I did the not the move, but so long story short, I started my career from the forex industry. Then I got more involved into the iGaming, and then back again in forex. So at that move between iGaming and forex, I found forex so much easier from a service, from an infrastructure provider perspective, than iGaming. Not that it's not challenging, but there are certain things that it's much easier, and what you said is correct. I mean, you don't have to deal with a 2 terabyte media file that need to be broadcasted in Australia with 0 latency.
How do you fix that? Just out of interest, because I honestly don't know.
There you have another sector which we are not involved. It's the actual the media streaming software providers. So again, comparison to forex, I would say that it's the equivalent of a liquidity bridge. Mm-hmm. So you have dedicated companies that develop software that do crazy high compression. Like, I don't know if you watched the movie on Netflix, the series actually, forgot the name. It was about a group of 5 people who were developing a compression algorithm to achieve on videos, like, if possible, 99% compression. So this is what it's all about. It's not about just network and servers, but have the necessary software to compress. Without compression, nothing works.
Yeah. And, the way I understand compression works is you take a file in its raw format, the way it is, with the bits and the bytes, with the zeros and the ones and whatever it is. And then there are logical, there's a logical kind of binary link in that raw file that can be almost predicted when you uncompress it.
Yes.
So you take out the obvious, and that helps reduce the size of the file. So the obvious gets almost truncated.
Yes.
And then shrunk into the unique specifics of a certain file that is not common, I guess.
Yes.
In basic, and then when you uncompress it, the obvious bits are filled in, and then
they get filled in. Correct.
Because in its compressed form, it cannot be read or consumed. It can only be uncompressed, and then.
And the challenge is not to lose quality.
Yes.
That's the challenging part. And again, that's why there are dedicated. It's like a different sector, which is more on the software side of things, which, along with infrastructure providers, they provide the media streaming side of things in an online casino.
Cool. So when we talk about the fintech industry, right, there are different solutions, and then this is a good chance now to talk about, what is the difference between. So a trader who is trading, right? They open up their trading terminal. That's a local application that is running either on their machine or on a VPS, as we mentioned before. And the benefits of that is that VPS is running in close proximity in terms of distance, actual physical distance, to the actual server where the broker has their trading server running. And the benefit for the trader there is, if somebody's sitting in Thailand, for example, and is trading on a server that's in London, and they've got an algorithm that's running where latency is important, it might take 100 milliseconds to reach the server in London. Whereas if they had a VPS with the bot, or the algorithm, the expert advisor running on the VPS, which is 2 milliseconds away, that helps the algorithm execute correctly.
Correct.
Now, let's speak specifically now about a broker and their decision, because as we mentioned, the trader, I'm just building context here, the trader has their terminal, they access a server, they send their trade to a server that's running somewhere.
Yes.
The broker has now the option. Do they set up an actual dedicated server? What's referred to in the industry is dedicated server, which is an actual physical server.
Yes.
Somebody gets up, goes on the plane, flies to the data center, walks in, goes through the security. I've seen some of these data centers. The security is incredible.
Yeah.
Tags. Anybody can just go in with sticky mats, whatever, to take off dust particles. You walk into this room where it's
like a chemistry lab.
Yes, like that, pretty much. And then very loud with air conditions buzzing, and then raised floor, cables everywhere, suspended ceiling, fire extinguisher things, super sophisticated stuff I've seen in Malta when I went. And with racks, with physical servers, so somebody could go and find the actual physical server, take it out, see the RAM, whatever. And the broker owns, or rather has, that's Rents. Their own, they rent that physical server, it's theirs. Versus cloud, which, again, if you had to go into one of Microsoft or Amazon's cloud environments, you'd see the same thing.
Of course.
But you're not looking at one specific server that you're renting. You're everywhere on this environment. So let's speak about that. The broker, why would a broker choose a dedicated versus a cloud, or the other way around, and the benefits? And let's talk about
that. From a broker's perspective, if we talk about the infrastructure topology that they need to decide when they start up, is that whatever they choose, they need to think about redundancy. So a dedicated server, in terms of performance, resources allocation, and security, it's a much more preferred option, without meaning that they lose redundancy versus if they were on cloud. They can still achieve redundancy with a single dedicated server in various ways, which is a bit too technical. Let's leave this for later. So on that dedicated server, what is recommended is that they host their main trading platform. It's where the trading platform is installed and it runs. So the benefit is that the software, the trading software, utilizes 100% of the CPU, of the memory, of the disk activity, and no one else is hosted on the same server. That's the good part. Now, nowadays, for security purposes and to ensure the best latency for traders worldwide, it is a common practice that the broker will deploy several proxy servers, access servers, in various locations around the world. So these servers, because they are just used for to pass through trades from the traders to the main physical trading server, it doesn't have to be a physical server. First of all, for cost optimization, if you have 25 of those, you can utilize virtual or cloud servers. It requires much less resources than the physical server that hosts the trading server. So we are talking about, let's say, 4 CPU, 4 gigabytes of RAM, and 50 to 60 gigabyte of storage. And imagine you have a lot of those to accommodate traders worldwide.
Yeah, so those proxy servers, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I like to explain it and give a different kind of expand on that. So the proxy server it doesn't handle everything. It handles the connections of trading terminals that are closest to that proxy or access server. And that access server cannot process an order. It doesn't do that. But what it can do, and where the terminal doesn't need to get information directly from the server, it can get it from the access server, is the history, for example, the chart history. So if somebody opens up a trading terminal and wants to see the history of the euro dollar, they don't have to wait for their request to be sent to the actual server, which is further away. They can get that information from the access
information
server.
from the data feed, actually.
From the data feed, exactly. And that's so information that is static, they can get from the access server. Information that's dynamic, or that's the result of it is not has not been processed yet.
Yeah.
For example, a new order, for a price that is currently being generated, the access server needs to communicate with the actual server. But what it does efficiently is it handles the multiple connections from multiple trading terminals into the access server, kind of filters out all of those requests, so that the main server is handling the important critical tasks.
Yes. So it's not overloaded with
multiple connections.
Yeah.
So the access server, that's another. It acts almost like a buffer. It says, okay, this I can handle myself. For example, you've asked for trading history, here, take it. If it's an order, okay, that I need to kind of batch it. And it takes all these orders, sends it to the server, gets it back, gives the request. Yeah. So that's it, as basically, if you had to explain it to a 5-year-old almost, which I think helps, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. Now, why would someone, so in most cases, brokerage firms, when we talk about, so the access server, it makes sense that can be a virtual server, it's okay.
Yeah.
The actual server, I've seen brokers who have that also as a cloud server, a strong virtual server. What are the decisions there? How would you advise a broker to pay attention to when it comes to the decision between a cloud for your main trade server versus dedicated?
Yes. So here is where we need to explain that cloud is not something abstract. The opposite. Cloud is full of bare metal. To set up a cloud environment, you need 20 or more bare metal machines. All those, they sit to the data center that you explained before, same as the one physical server resides on the same data center. So regardless the fact that a virtual machine on the cloud consists of several bare metal servers, each instance, each cloud instance or virtual machine instance, it shares some resources with the rest. Now, it depends how each provider does the segmentation of resources. Still, it can never give the performance that a dedicated server will offer to the broker. So Even if CPU is maxed out, even if RAM memory is maxed out and dedicated, regardless how the service provider does the storage setup, whether it's on a centralized storage or a storage inside each node, each server, it's still shared. Meaning that if cloud is 10 physical servers together, you are inside one of them like 10 other customers. Whereas on a dedicated server, you are by yourself. Now, depending on the business operation regarding on the software you want to install, there it's where you need to do a small matrix table and check cost, how critical is what I will install. If I can have full redundancy on the dedicated server. If not, what am I missing? Is it lack of redundancy on the storage? Can I afford losing data? Is it lack of redundancy on the network? Can I afford being down? So all this, it's giving the answers to this helps you, choose whether to go on a virtual server versus on a dedicated. From personal experience, we are hosting brokers on virtual servers, mainly startups. But when there is a high trading activity or high traffic or whatever, they will feel it. So the same client, if they were on a dedicated server, that would be a totally different case.
Right. Obviously there's the pros and cons. You've tapped into the benefits, I guess, of a dedicated server versus a cloud server. One of the advantages on the flip side is that in the cloud server environment, as you mentioned, you're tapping into the resources of multiple different servers, which is the responsibility of the cloud provider.
Correct.
So there's this layer on top. This is where DevOps obviously ties in. There's this layer on top that allocates. So when you create this virtual machine, it gets, CPU from this physical server, gets some RAM from here, a little bit of storage from all of them. It's kind of this whole technical kind of background in this thing that's running, which is making available this virtual server. But the point that I wanted to bring forward is, in the case of a dedicated server and the pros and cons, with a dedicated server, there's what's called as end of life, right? Yeah. So it's your single server, it's physical, and only you have access to it. But in 5 years, that hardware gets outdated, used, it's bare metal, as you mentioned. There's wear and tear. Whereas in the cloud scenario, these different servers also have wear and tear, but then the cloud provider is responsible to provision new servers.
Yes.
They replace servers,
correct.
Power supplies.
And most of the times it's a seamless.
It's completely unnoticed
correct.
to
correct.
the person who has the cloud server. Versus if you have a dedicated server, this is the con, right? This is the
correct.
one of the.
But let me bring an analogy so we help everyone to understand. What you are saying is absolutely correct. But what I always say is that it's the same scenario with the decision, shall I buy a car or shall I lease it? Shall I buy a car or shall I use car sharing? So if you buy a car, you need to take care of the maintenance, you need to replace tires, etc. The car has, let's say, viable life period, I don't know, 6, 7 years, 8 years, 10 years. So if you don't want to take care of the maintenances, if you don't want to pay for tires replacement, you can consider the car leasing. But if you have a business, if what you are going to host on the server or the purpose you are going to lease the car, it's for a business, you're a taxi driver, you are going to use it for 5 years, it doesn't worth getting going for lease. So this is what I was talking about, the matrix table. You need to compare, first of all, based on your business needs and your project requirements to make the right decision. Maybe all the variables will lead you to say, okay, I'm going for a cloud server, but then security comes in, and we've seen large cloud providers having security issues. So there are a lot of people actually like 4 or 5 years ago, there was the big rise of cloud, and then suddenly businesses are coming back to the bare metal machines, and this is because of the progress of the DevOps technologies, the DevOps tools. Because nowadays a bare metal server can be provided by service providers as a cloud, meaning you can manage everything on your bare metal server without knowing any commands. You can do physical work, meaning if the provider will connect, let's say, 4 cables for network, you can manage whether you want single network feed or dual redundant. So bare metal servers, as they are now, they are built so they provide the security and performance you want, plus giving people the tools and the utilities to manage it as if it were a virtual server. This is where I see the industry goes.
Yeah, and there's also, I know managing these platforms, MetaTrader specifically, they have built-in options to do real-time replication.
Yeah.
And that is real-time replication across 2 different physical servers.
Yeah.
And as mentioned, there's different levels when it comes to, when we talk about redundancy. And what we mean by redundancy is that business continues if something fails on a physical machine. So one example is we have a server that has a power supply. If it's only got one power supply, and now the power supply is obviously, there's a lot of moving parts. There's this fan, there's this resistors, it heats up, things that burns, so the whole server's down.
Yeah.
And now you put a second power supply on the same machine. That is a form of redundancy. If this one power supply breaks, this one still supports the whole machine, and while it's running, it can be replaced. Yeah. So that's one level, and that pans off across the different hardware components. So disks, RAM,
of course. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
CPU. Even 2 CPUs. Well,
CPU no, but CPU relies a lot on the memory. On the memory configuration, and like the disks with the RAID and the RAID controller, you can do the same with memory. Network,
2 cards or 3 cards or whatever it is, 100%. So, but you can get it up to a certain level. There are obviously points of failure on one physical machine that you cannot bypass. Motherboard, for example.
Yes.
Motherboard. The motherboard is what has all of these things connected to it. And the solution to that is you have a physical, whole other server running somewhere else. And preferably, and as you've seen brokers, what they do is they choose to have that second server, that entirely different server, running not in the same data center, in a different data center. And that's for another reason, again related to redundancy, for geo redundancy. So geolocation redundancy. If for some reason the connectivity to London has got a problem by some upstream provider, the broker has the option to fail over and use another server in Amsterdam or wherever it is.
Correct. And this is where, if we go back to the conversation, choosing between a physical server and a virtual, a good practice for startup brokers that maybe they are limited on their budget, is to have the primary trading server as physical and the backup as virtual. Of course, if you think that the backup server in case of failure of the primary one will be the new active primary one, I mean, you don't need to go very minimum or low on the specs, because given a specific disaster scenario, your backup server will kick in. But if your disaster recovery or business continuity policies to have the backup server just to hold the fort, and you are not planning to keep it as the new primary server for a long time, it's a good practice to have it as virtual. So you keep your costs down, and you don't have to pay for a physical server for something that is a hot backup.
What I advise any broker that we work with is, if you've got budget constraints like that, maybe it's better to not start, because this is something that I highly advise that you don't cut back on. It's business critical.
Yeah.
When the point comes, if or when it comes, and yes, it may be very rare, if at all it ever happens, but when it does happen, that second server needs to be as powerful as your primary.
That's correct.
Because it needs to pick up exactly the same processes, exactly the same things that are being handled by the primary. If you've got some secondary backup that's on some cloud server, which is less, to keep costs down, one thing that could happen is, because we know on cloud you pay for what's in use.
Yes.
And
not always, but
so like you could have a smaller machine that costs less, and in the event of a failover, it will take you longer, a few minutes more, but in the event of a failover, you can increase the size.
Yes.
You have that option. So you go and you increase the size very quickly, relatively quickly. You wait for the server to start up again. So from 4 cores CPU, let's say you need 16 cores, click the button, whatever, and then only pay for when it's actually necessary. Yes. So that does make sense. But even so, it's a different infrastructure, it's a different architecture. It may not run the same as how the primary is.
Ideally, what I also tell clients is that these two servers are twins. They have to be identical.
Exactly the same.
Identical, yes.
Good. Now, when it comes to the VPS, how are you? Do you have any like small customers that are running there, or is it just do you offer it as an optional add-on service to brokers who want to offer it to their clients, and then you deal with them? If say a trader who's looking at this wants a VPS from NetShop, I know we've had a project together. It has it's still in the pipeline there, where the idea here was that we. Subscription basis, you go and you click, and we've done the APIs. We haven't concluded it yet. Maybe let's see the feedback. Maybe maybe people want it, so then we just finish it. The idea is that in automation, somebody goes and wants to subscribe. No physical person needs to be available to process that order. Through the APIs, it goes, creates a machine, click, whatever.
That's correct. The API part is what forex brokers find it interesting, because they can integrate using our API the VPS services with any custom plans they want within their traders portal. So we have brokers, for example, who they want to offer free VPS for clients who meet certain criteria. Let's say minimum trading volume per month. If you reach that, you are entitled for a free VPS. So without the end trader, the end client knowing about NetShop, they can deploy a VPS for trading purposes from within their broker's trading portal. The same API is popular among service providers and development companies that they want to deploy VPSs. Deploy or cancel or reinstall operating system without logging into our portal, going there, clicking buttons. So all that can be done with few commands.
That's interesting. Yeah. So do you have currently, so there's different solutions or, business sectors that are quite interesting. I think that, maybe we can, spread some light on and specifically what I think is an interesting topic is related to blockchain and crypto and mining. Do you have any customers or people that currently use your infrastructure for whatever mining purposes? Can we get some information there? How does mining work? What are the important things to look at if somebody is interested to know? Not necessarily to get into it, but just to know how it all works.
So we are not into mining in the context of like having a data center that accepts that is a mining farm. So in our data centers, because of the regulations and the certifications, we don't allow, at least to the current data centers, mining devices. What we do though, and we do have clients, for example, regulated by MFSA in Malta, who are crypto exchanges like competitors to Binance and Coinbase. So there is where some locations of our data centers are there to satisfy regulations for certain industries. And for the, let's say, the blockchain and the mining, an alternative mining solution is that we offer, and this started after COVID passed, GPU servers. So during COVID, it was chaos because of the lack of supply of chipsets and GPU cards by the factories.
What's GPU?
GPU is like CPU. Yeah, CPU is the central processing unit. GPU is the graphical processing unit, and it supplements the CPU. So GPU back in the days, even until now, but before it was more popular for the big desktop PCs like Alienware, where people could play games. Nowadays, and after the booming of blockchain and crypto and mining, more and more people started knowing about GPU because they started understanding from from a practical point of view what it can do. So, and GPU can have 10 times more processing, faster processing than CPU. It can be used in several industries, like in streaming is for transcoding, decoding, encoding satellite feeds. In mining is used to do calculations that are needed within the blockchain network. In trading also is used again for calculations of specific algorithms, whatever whatever is the business case. So right after the COVID passed and all the let's say the factories went back to their standard supply chain timings and deliveries, GPU is coming more and more popular, and we are now seeing providers. We are in the early steps of doing it, but we are still in the, let's say, R&D phase. GPU VPS. So the first providers that started doing it are those providers who had a lot of GPU servers. The clients canceled them at some point, so they were left with a lot of GPUs in stock. So what to do with it? Let's deploy 50 nodes with GPUs and provide it as cloud. We don't have so many in stock, so that's the difficulty of starting it. But that's the that's the goal, and this is where the GPU industry goes.
So it's so interesting how this conversation that we're having over here can link up to decision about which stock to trade, right? Because we're talking about GPU, and one of the companies that produce these, manufacture the GPUs is NVIDIA.
Yeah.
And AI, artificial intelligence, with the machine learning algorithms, those are very dependent on GPU, and
Of course.
and because of that, NVIDIA, and with the rise of AI, where it's becoming an increasing, a very important sector, NVIDIA's stocks have just
of course.
jumped. So
Yeah.
in the context of the scope of what we're talking about here in traders, NVIDIA, in the macroeconomic level would have made sense, but so how does somebody, you got to look at macroeconomics, right? You got to see what are the trends, what's important, what's up and rising, and then invest in the relevant businesses.
Yes.
I guess that makes sense there.
Correct.
So yeah, GPU, NVIDIA, and so interesting. And I know that on Microsoft, in Azure, on the cloud, you can choose CPU specific, servers, cloud servers, or GPU. They have this option.
Yeah. And this is the difficult yet challenging part of running a hosting business. Unless you declare yourself as, I'm an iGaming hosting provider, or I'm a forex broker hosting provider, that's the easy thing to do, because you focus on that, you know your products, you know what your current and future clients will want. What I've labeled NetShop, that is both a B2C and B2B hosting provider, and B2C is insanely difficult because you need to have everything ready at the right price to be able to accommodate a €2 client without spending time, and be able to accommodate 100 of them within a day. That's the challenging part. Yeah. And to be honest with you, we didn't have this mentality up until COVID. So during COVID, and it's not something to be ashamed, but most people, like friends and family, they thought that during COVID, because of their work from home, they thought that whoever was in the tech industry made millions. Like with us was the opposite, because we had a lot of clients who were sportsbook operators, and they closed down.
Really?
Yes. So the online casino, it was booming. Forex industry was booming from a service provider perspective, but the sports book, because there were no games, no football, no basketball, they closed down. So it was then that I made the decision that, first of all, we cannot rely on one big industry, and we cannot rely on the B2B sector. So we did the move to B2C, just to balance and not put all our eggs in one basket.
This is the life that you live as an entrepreneur, right? Yeah. You got to look at your vulnerabilities and be able to be agile and make a shift to survive.
Yeah.
It's the sports book, as you mentioned. Wow, I would have never. Most of the sports books also have the online casino. That would have been, where it's not reliant on physical people. The games, which stopped during COVID, and that would have kept them afloat. Yeah. I mean, I have an example where actually I was speaking to a friend. They had physical casinos in Mexico, and just before the COVID, they made games available online. And when the COVID hit, it wasn't like planned. It was they had it in the pipeline, but not because they knew what was going to happen. It was just a small diversification, but they got it just in the end, and they didn't have any online payment method. So what they were doing is they were physically going and collecting the deposits.
Wow.
And then they would then they would top up their accounts for them to trade, for them to not trade, sorry, to gamble online.
Yeah.
But at least they had the ability to gamble. And all that was missing until they got it available was the physical collection of cash, which was, businesses. You could be around if you don't constantly analyze and monitor your vulnerabilities, you could one day be upended and not realize,
that's correct. That's correct. That's the challenging part.
Yes. This what I'm doing over here, for example, this podcast, I have no clue where it's going to lead. I'm just doing it. It's fun and we enjoy it.
You will end up with 2 million views on YouTube. So,
I mean, I have no expectation. That's what makes this so easy, right? I mean, for us, it's we have these kinds of conversations all the time, right? And it's topics that we enjoy, which we're good at, which we do every day. And instead of talking, I mean, we were talking about this at a coffee shop before. We just continue our conversation over here. The only difference is we record it, we upload it, and whatever happens, happens. Let's see. And in the meantime, we've been speaking almost for an hour, believe it or not. So which the time has gone by so quick. Was there any other topic that you wanted to maybe touch up on that, around NetShop and what it's involved in? Maybe what's a good discussion is the different data centers that you mentioned earlier on in our conversation, where you mentioned you got your Tokyo, London, Amsterdam, Malta,
Cyprus,
obviously.
Brazil now.
Brazil.
Yes, we started with dedicated servers in Brazil. We have in our plans before the end of 2023 to launch Brazil VPS, but of course it's the only constraint right now is the financial capital required to do it. So we know that Brazil is the next big thing. It has been since basically right after COVID, booming for iGaming customers. Now with the right arrangements and regulation about payments, forex industry will hit hard the Latin America. So I wanted to make sure that we have a presence there. Of course, it's a very expensive hosting location, and that's why we want to, it's risk mitigation. We don't want to start something too early, but we cannot start it when it's too late. So I believe by September, October 2023, we will have our cloud infrastructure there.
That's interesting, and I guess one question that normally comes up is, since the majority of the quotes, the liquidity providers, the exchanges and whatever it is, they're mainly most of the time, they're based in London, New York.
Yeah.
Right? So a broker who's sitting in Asia or Brazil, for example, again, dependent on, how the broker is regulated, if they're able to take the book, it doesn't remove the fact that they still need to communicate with servers which are in London or New York, which are,
and Singapore.
Singapore.
And Singapore, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
The liquidity providers in Singapore as well.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Singapore is in Southeast Asia, but it's one of the most advanced, I call it the infrastructure capital of Asia. It's in a very strategic location. The infrastructure is amazing, and the comparison between is cheaper than Japan, is cheaper than Hong Kong. So there are a lot of liquidity providers there.
Close to Australia, close to Hong Kong, very central location.
Yes. For traders in Malaysia, Thailand, it has a very, very good latency. It's close to Hong Kong. It doesn't have very good latency with China, but you have Hong Kong for that, and then Hong Kong with Singapore has low. So our data centers in Asia have I believe, the right topology to facilitate a good latency for someone who wants a solution in Asia.
Yeah, you know what, for me, this I saw quite a few years ago, which was a super interesting visual. And you tell me if this is correct. So if you had to look at Earth, how all these data centers connect, you know, the whole internet, and you had to look at the cables, the way they're laid. They're actually physical, big, massive cables like this that are lying in the sea, that run under the ocean.
Yes.
You know.
To imagine the connection between Malta and Italy or Malta and Europe is through one submarine cable from Malta to Sicily.
Wow.
One.
And then from Sicily, obviously connected to mainland Europe.
Yes.
That's where.
And this is what makes Malta an expensive hosting location in terms of connectivity. And on the other hand, this is what makes Singapore the best hub in Asia because of its submarine cables.
Multiple cables connected to Singapore, whereas Malta is just one.
And again, that's what makes Brazil an expensive location. It's all about the network infrastructure.
Because obviously, if there's one cable, that means that there's limitation in bandwidth.
Of course.
Because through one connection, you can only send through so much information.
Correct. That's why internet was very expensive in Cyprus, because up until recently there was just one submarine cable. Then we got connected with Israel, and you know, more cables. It means more bandwidth, and the providers are able to utilize economies of scale to sell cheaper.
And then you hear these incredible stories where, like, a whale is in the bottom of the ocean, wants to scratch an itch, and it goes onto the cable and it scratches and breaks it.
And that's where your internet drops.
And then a trader goes, my trade doesn't work. And then the broker has to answer, sorry, a whale scratched an itch. That's funny. Wow. So, Stefano, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dinos.
A beautiful conversation.
Yeah, it was very nice.
Let's do some closing comments over here. Where can people find NetShop? How can we find Stefano? Whoever wants to speak with you, obviously. We'll provide the links as always. Let's do some closing comments here.
So our website is netshop-isp.com.cy. Someone can find me or NetShop through LinkedIn. I don't use Facebook, I don't use Instagram, but I'm daily on LinkedIn. It's a very nice way, you know, to catch up with the industry and friends. We attend events, not all of them, because after COVID that would be unsustainable. There are millions of events happening throughout the year, but we do attend the main ones.
There's one tomorrow, right? In Limassol. Where are we? Tomorrow. Sigma,
it's a networking event.
Yes.
It's a networking event, yes.
Are you going to go?
For iGaming, no, I'm not going.
Okay.
People from NetShop will go, but
I'll go.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stefano. This was a good conversation.
Yes.
And it's a wrap.